got a good crowd here. This is impressive. I've been a master gardener for over 20 years. My training, I'm an ag engineer, but I like to say that I learned most of what I learned by trial and error, mostly error. I was raised by a single mother on a dairy farm, and she grew most of what we ate. And she used the Hugo principle. I'm sure you're all familiar with that, right?
Sure.
You're not? Wherever I go, you go. So I followed her all around, and I've been gardening for 60, well, never mind. A long time. So I gave you all a quiz, or most of you. I ran out. I didn't expect quite so many of you tonight, but I think that's wonderful. So I gave you all a quiz. Let's take a look at that before we start, because if you know all the answers to these, you can leave. Or you can stick around and just don't tell me everything that I'm going to say. All right? Container gardening is beneficial for apartment dwellers, people with limited mobility, people with poor soil, or all of the above. Oh, very good. Most of you can leave. All right. Materials for containers can be wood, ceramic, clay, or plastic. Old shoes, barrels, horse troughs, or straw bales. Bushel baskets, old wagons, wash tubs, or buckets, or all of the above.
All of the above.
Oh boy, I just can go back home now. Soil used in the container should be garden soil, soilless potting mix, all compost, or any of the above. Oh, you don't agree. Patrice, the new level 1 master gardener, says B, soilless potting mix. She's correct. Yes, it is soilless potting mix. It is not any of the above. And I'm not going to tell you why, because you're going to have to stay awake and listen. All right, containers should be watered once daily, once weekly, once monthly, or just when I get around to it. You guys all need to stay. Every day. Every day. When designing a flower garden container, consider the rule of thirds. Color, size, texture, proportion, and growth requirement of plants, what my family wants, or all of the above.
All of the above.
Very good. If you don't know what these things mean, stay awake, pay attention, we'll talk about it. All right. If a little fertilizer is good, a lot of fertilizer is better. True or false? Oh, goodness sakes. Okay, we won't have to spend a lot of time on that. Only flowers can be grown in containers. True or false? Very good. Windy days will increase watering requirements. True. Very good. Any vegetable can be grown in a container. False. So did you do what? False. False. Sweet corn. You cannot make sweet corn. Oh, a trick question. Well, you know, I just have to see if you're awake. Color combinations can be monochromatic, analogous, or complementary. True or false? True. Very good. All right, so let's get started. Container gardening. You know, I do this every time. By the way, silence your phones, please. And I'm notorious for not remembering to do that. That's very bad, but I actually remembered to do it this time. All right, advantages. Very few constraints. You don't have a lot of land. You have poor soil. You live in a condo. It's very easily accessed. So that's a lot of the advantages to container gardening. The other thing is, it doesn't take a lot of money. Minimal investment. You can have your plants by your back door. It's very helpful for people with limited mobility. You can add to, you can take away plants as the season progresses. It's great for cooks. You can have an herb garden right at your back door. You can have a fresh tomato at your back door. I had a salad garden. Now I live out in the country. I have a 50 by 50 garden. I have no need for container gardens. But my garden is way out further than I want to walk sometimes. So I had a little salad garden right by my back door last year. Human flexibility. It can be a work of art. It can be something beautiful. You can move the plants as you need to get sun. If you don't have a lot of sun in your location, you can use one of these plant dollars. Set it on a plant dollar and move it as the sun progresses. You can experiment with different plants that you can't normally grow in this environment. like tropical plants. You can experiment with succulents. You can experiment with a wide variety of plants. So getting started with container gardening, you need a container, soil, notice that's in quotes from your quiz. You want to use soilless potting mix. You need water, sun, fertilizer, and you need plants. So let's talk about the container. Decide what plants you're going to grow. That's your first decision. Some vegetables need very deep pots. Some only need an 8-inch pot. What space do you have? Maybe you're going to do a window box because you don't have a lot of space. Maybe you have an empty corner to fill. Maybe you're going to go down some steps. So figure out what you want to grow and what space you have to fill. Your pot has to have adequate drainage. You either need to have holes in the bottom. Ideally, you'll have holes in the bottom. Figure out how to do that. Drill them, get something that leaks. That sounds funny, but I've planted in rusty things. Rusty things leak, so then you don't have to drill holes in the bottom. You can put 1-inch pieces of styrofoam in the bottom of the container to allow for some drainage. Check it after you water it. Make sure that it's draining through so that it's got adequate drainage. And don't place that container flush on concrete. That will inhibit the ability for that water to flow through. You want to put it up on some blocks or some bricks or on a dolly, but not on a hard surface. And by the way, if you use those pieces of styrofoam, it will also reduce the weight of your container. I plant this, I get these things out here. These are my thinking outside the box containers. I plant in this every spring, this big wash tub. And see, I use these pieces of broken styrofoam in the bottom. And I put this underneath it. I have 2 of them that I place underneath it. Does 2 things for me. It keeps it up. See, this is my rusty container. I didn't drill any holes in it. It's just got rust on the bottom. But I place these 2 pieces of PVC underneath, and it does 2 things for me. It gets it up off the ground so that it can drain, and then if I need to move it, I just roll it. That works. All right, talk about the types of material. Wood tends to be warm and attractive. You can use cedar or redwood and it doesn't rot. You can build them to a specific size. You want to avoid treated wood though. Treated wood is not good for your plants. The lumber industry has moved away from encouraging consumers to use treated wood. They don't use arsenic anymore, they use copper and a fungicide, but nevertheless they have moved consumers away from using treated wood. Glazed terracotta is very pretty, it is heavier, and it is a larger initial cost. It does tend to break, but they're real pretty in a grouping. Regular terracotta, or clay pots, are very inexpensive, but they do dry out rapidly. Since the sides are not glazed, the water will move through the sides as well. So they dry out more rapidly, and sometimes you'll have to water those more than once a day. They are prone to breakage. If you have kids that are running trucks and they bump into the side, there goes your bump. If they're throwing baseballs, there goes your bump. Okay? So those are prone, but they're very practical and they're very beautiful in a grouping as well. Plastic, there's a million plastic pots out there. And plastic does very well. It will tend to degrade in the sun over a number of years, but there's a huge variety and they're relatively inexpensive. Oops, this thing wants to jump. Then think outside the box. Shoes, boots, barrels, bushel baskets, wash tubs, whatever you have at hand. I found this and I'm going to plant in it. I just thought it was rather novel. I thought it was kind of interesting. And I've planted in this for several years.
Oh.
It looks real cute with a bunch of violas in it.
How'd you get a hole in the bottom, or did you wait for it to rust?
Nope, I drilled those.
Okay.
I'm pretty good with the drill. I just have to wait till my husband leaves home. And I planted in this. Holes in the bottom. And I have an old army boot. Oh, well, it's not old. It's my son's army boot, actually. My son had an accident and shattered his right leg. And it's the boot they didn't cut off. And I plant in that every year.
You put all dirt in the whole thing, or did you put something else on the bottom first?
With these, they're small enough that I put soil in them. I put, that one has the styrofoam that I use. And then this is kind of a novel idea. I got this at the thrift store. I am planting this. And you don't have to do anything with this because you can, I don't know if you can see, but
It's
this
her
is
purse. She planted.
It's her purse? Okay then.
Oh, that's
You took it-
hilarious.
You took it to the thrift store?
Yes.
Next time I pass the thrift store, I use these, I teach 2 youth classes, and I teach this thinking outside, planting in unusual containers is what we call it. And I tell the kids to bring in unusual containers, but there's always 3 or 4 that don't bring anything. And so I take these, I pick things like this up to take in for the kids. And
I have earrings to match it if you want.
Well, I had 2 purses, and one of the little girls chose the other one. I'm quite sure this one's going to go next year. If you have anything like this that you want to donate for my youth class, I'll take it. But this is kind of a kid. Now, don't you wish you had it back?
Well, kind of.
Think outside the box. Think outside the box. All right, let's talk about the soil. You want a lightweight mix. Don't use garden soil. Don't go out to your garden and dig the soil up and put it in there. First of all, it's too heavy. Second of all, it brings in fungus, it brings in bacteria, it brings in weeds, so just don't do that. The potting soil mixes that you purchase from the store are all soilless mixes. They are peat, perlite, sand, vermiculite. You can read the label. They're all labeled. You can make your own. You can take 1 part peat moss, 1 part compost, 1 part sand, mix them together, heat them in your oven at 210 degrees for an hour, and then plan on moving. It stinks. And the smell permeates your carpet, and your curtains, and your clothes, and your furniture. It's much cheaper to buy it. You want to leave a 2-inch space at the top of the container. Now, I to tell you something about potting mixes. You get what you pay for. The bags that are 99 cents, you want to read the label. You want to avoid potting mixes that have sedge peat. When you water those, they will turn hard as a brick. So the 99-cent bags are not a good deal. All right, so pay a little more, get some good potting mix. Sun. Usually containers need at least 5 hours of sun a day. Tomatoes and peppers need more. Leafy vegetables can get by with a little less. Follow the planting guide that you'll find on the back of your vegetable or flower packages or on the little tag. Use the dolly to maximize the sun if you need to. All right, water now. Containers will dry out quickly. A really large container like this wash tub, you might be able to get by with watering that every other day. But as a general rule, they need watered every day. If it's a clay pot and it's really hot and it's really windy, you may have to water that twice a day. If you're watering it adequately and it's still turning yellow, you're probably drowning it. You don't have adequate drainage and you're actually drowning that plant. If it's wilting between waterings, you're not watering it enough and you're putting that plant under stress. So fertilizer. These soilless mixes don't have a lot of nutrients. Many of them now have a fertilizer mixed in with them. But they'll say on the bag, good for 2 months, good for a specific amount of time. So again, read the label. And then after that time has expired, you need to water them every couple of weeks with a water-soluble fertilizer like Miracle-Gro. Alternatively, you can use a time-released fertilizer when you plant it. Osmocote, they look like tapioca beads, little
Yes.
beads. You can mix that in as you plant it, and that's good for the whole season.
What's that called?
Osmocote. It's written right here.
Oh,
Osmocote, okay? Do not over-fertilize. People get a little heavy-handed with the fertilizer, and you do not want to do that. You want to fertilize, the Osmocote will say so many teaspoons per inch of diameter of the pot. Follow the directions. Plants. So now let's talk about vegetables. We're going to talk about vegetables first. You know why? Because you need them. Because I like them. Oh, that's why. And I'm doing the presentation. All right. Choose containers that suit the vegetable, and then you're going to need to choose a cultivar for the container. You're not going to choose a big beefsteak tomato. You're going to choose a little patio or a little pixie tomato. So tomatoes. 1 plant per 5-gallon container, or the equivalent. You can use a bushel basket. You can use a burlap bag with holes in it. You can use a cardboard box that you've lined with plastic as long as you've poked some holes in that plastic. But you're going to use a celebrity or a patio or a pixie tomato. There are 2 kinds of tomatoes. There's determinate tomatoes. They're a bush tomato. They're determined. They stay in one spot. And then there's indeterminate tomatoes. They're a vining crop, and they just like to go everywhere. Don't get one of those, okay? Get a determinate tomato and get a smaller cultivar. Something smaller. You're still probably going to have to stake them, but get something smaller. One year, my garden completely flooded out, and I put a pixie in, and it did well. You're not going to get huge tomatoes, but you're going to get nice little tasty ones. Peppers. 1 plant per 2-gallon container. A hanging basket is the size of a 2-gallon container. California wonder, sweet banana, most any pepper variety you can grow in a 2-gallon container. By the way, you do not get that cap. Doesn't come with it. Lettuce and spinach, any of the greens, you can use a window box type container. They can tolerate most shade, more shade, and they only need about 8 inches of depth. Beets, carrots, and radishes, again, a 2-gallon container. Remember, that's the hanging basket size. You want to thin them 2 to 3 inches. You can use the carrot. You're not going to grow those big honking long ones, okay? You're going to have to go with the little gourmet carrots, like little finger thumbelina, but most any of the radishes, except for the icicles, which are the really long ones. Most any of the radishes you can grow in containers as well. Broccoli and cabbage, 1 or 2 plants per 5-gallon container, and pretty much any variety of those. Whole beans, a 2-gallon container with a trellis, spaced a couple inches apart. Any of these varieties will work. Summer squash. Summer squash is zucchini or yellow squash. You can put 1 plant per 2-gallon container, and don't plant more than 1 because your neighbors will lock their doors when they see you. Any variety of the zucchini, any variety of the yellow squash. A cucumber, you can put 1 plant per gallon container. You can either get a vining one and put a trellis in, or you can get a bush variety. Put a bush variety in. Salad bush and Space Master are both bush varieties of cucumbers. And if you have questions, if I'm going too fast, you can email me and I will give you the information that you need. Here's some examples. This is a salad container in a wagon. By the way, I have a wagon. I got it at the dump. It's nice and rusty, so I didn't have to put any holes in it. All right, let's talk about flowers now. You can do a single container, you can do multiple containers, you can plant bulbs in containers. Choose a container to fit your space. You want to choose plants with similar requirements, similar moisture, similar soil, similar light. Read the labels. Some plants like to dry out between waterings. Some plants like to stay very moist. Maybe you want all succulents. Maybe you want tropical plants. Now I'm going to tell you this, and none of you are going to pay any attention to me. The rule of thumb is 1 plant for every 6 inches of top diameter. But you guys are all going to pack those pots just as full as you can. You're going to pay a bit of attention to that guideline because we live in Wisconsin. And you want those pots to look pretty when you fill them. And you're going to end up pulling out some of those plants as the season goes on. I know that. I tell you the guidelines and you just ignore them. These are some examples. This is a succulent wagon. Here we have some woody plants surrounded by some herbaceous plants. All right, so when you go to plant your container, you want something with some height, you want something that spreads, and you want something that trails. The easiest way for me to remember that is you want a thriller, a filler, and a spiller. A thriller, a filler, and a spiller. The thriller is tall, the filler fills in, and the spiller trails. Now there's some people say you also want a chiller, which is something with bright color. Okay, so a thriller, a filler, and a spiller. You want to vary the leaf size, the shape, and the texture. Hostas tend to be coarse, and yes, you can put hostas in containers. Salvias are medium. You want to use contrasting size and textures in your pot. Here are some examples. Here's your thriller, your filler, and your spiller. Your thriller, your filler, and this will vine. This is your spiller. By the way, you feel free to interrupt with questions. Yes, ma'am?
Do sweet potato vines actually produce sweet potatoes?
Yes, they do.
Okay.
But I understand that they're not particularly tasty. Here's another one. Your thriller, your filler, and your spiller. Yes?
Is there a rule of thumb as to how much potting soil you should have for the plants?
You
How
want to
deep?
leave 2 inches of depth, 2 inches at the top,
Yeah.
but you want to fill your pot up but leave room for the roots to grow.
Okay.
We're going to do a demo
Oh,
when I'm
okay.
done speaking.
Okay.
Maybe that'll help answer your
Okay.
question. All right, here we go. Rule of thirds. That means that you have, the plant is 1/3 and the pot, 2/3, and the pot is 1/3 of your height. Unless you have a really neat looking tall plant, then you flip that around. Then your pot is 2/3 and your plant is 1/3. And you always use an odd number of plants. That's what the artistic people tell us. I'm not artistic, I'm an engineer, and I have a real hard time with that. I like putting even numbers of things in. But let's look at these examples. They have a really cool pot here. So this is 2/3 and 1/3. 2/3 and 1/3. But as a general rule, you want 2/3 of your plant and 1/3 of your pot, unless you want to highlight your pot, which is what they're doing here. So the rule of thirds. All right, color considerations. Maybe you want to complement your background. Maybe you really like it up north, and you want to be thinking about up north, so you're bringing that home. Maybe you like the beach. Maybe you have a favorite color scheme. Maybe you want to bring your foyer colors outside onto your front porch. There are warm colors, cool colors, and neutral colors, and I never can remember those, so I have to read them. Those of you who are artistically inclined probably remember them. Warm colors, red, yellow, and orange, and they appear closer. They show up even when they're viewed as at a distance. Cool colors are blue, purple, and pinks, and they increase the illusion of distance. They're best appreciated up close, and then the neutral colors are green, cream, brown, and tan. And lighting will affect how color is perceived. If you're going to plant a garden, if you work all day and you only see your garden at night, then you plant a moonlit garden. And I wrote a newspaper article about that. You want to plant flowers that bloom with white blooms and cream blooms and silvery foliage, and that will just pop and show at night. You don't want to use the vibrant colors in a moonlit garden. All right, so we can go monochromatic, which this is all one color hue, and that tends to be very soothing and very elegant. Or we can go analogous, and they're side by side on the color wheel, like here. This is side by side on the color wheel, and that tends to be very calming. Or we can go complementary, and they tend to be exciting and dramatic, and they tend to be opposite on the color wheel. When I teach this to my youth classes, I then take a big piece of poster board and I make a color wheel. And then I have them cut things out of a seed catalog and glue it on a color wheel so that they get the concept of a color wheel. So these are some examples. This is a bed of strawberries. Here we have a bed of succulents. This would be complementary, and here we have monochromatic. Be creative, think outside the box, because with a little bit of creativity and a little bit of thought, you never know what you can grow in a pot.
Oh, cute.
All right, questions, anybody? Yes?
What about using soil from last year?
It is best to not do that. It is best to put that in your compost pile, put that around your perennials, and start fresh every year. Yes, ma'am?
If you plant bulbs in pots, do you have to dig them up and take them in for the winter?
It's best to do that, yes.
Could you just take the pot into the cellar?
You could do that. It depends on the bulb. Some of them may rot.
Okay.
Depends on the bulb.
Where's a good source of compost? Is there a public free compost?
I don't know the answer to that anymore. I used to know the answer. I know there are some in the area, but I don't know the answer to that right now. Yes.
Is that the beginning stages of dogwood?
Anybody else? Yes.
I just want to say that last year I was made aware of August 8th is dump zucchini on your neighbor's porch day.
Oh, write that on your
So there
calendar.
is a designated day for that.
Okay, did you hear that? August 8th is dump zucchini on your neighbor's door day. So everybody lock your doors on August 8th.
So how steep is the best depth for a tomato?
You want, when you plant a tomato, it's the only plant, you want to pinch off the lower leaves and leave just the top section of leaves. You want to dig a trench. Then you gently lay the root and the stem in that trench, and you bring that plant up gently and you cover the stem and the root. Everything that's under the soil will root, and you'll have a very strong plant. You don't necessarily want to plant it deep. You want to plant it on it. You want to trench plant it on its side. But be careful when you bring it up that you don't break the stem.
Yes.
You're welcome. Anyone else? All right. We are going to do a demo to show you how to put these containers together in an attractive manner. We have a flower container and we have a vegetable container. So I didn't bring any styrofoam or anything to put in one of these. You know, the old school used to say that you always put some coarse gravel or some broken chips of clay pot in here. But you know, the research has shown that that's not necessary, A, and B, it actually causes the roots to tangle up down here. Come over to the vegetable pot. So we don't put anything in the bottom anymore. Unless this was a very large pot and you wanted to make it more lightweight, then you would put some broken pieces of styrofoam in the bottom. You want to tend to stay away from styrofoam peanuts because they tend to degrade. You want to get bigger pieces of styrofoam and put them in the bottom. But I didn't put anything in these because I look around and I see some very strong individuals, and I think you can all handle this size pot. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to get our potting soil, and we're going to go ahead and put it in here. Mary Ann's going to do the vegetable one, and I'm going to do the flower one. All right?
Okay. All right.
And you know the best time to buy your potting soil? In the fall.
Oh, I'd say I'll have an air.
Yeah. This size bag of potting soil is $12 or $13, and I got this for $5.
Wow.
Where'd you get?
In the fall.
In the fall. It clears them out in the fall, and there's no reason that you can't store it over the winter. It doesn't degrade in any way. Okay, enough of that.
Is the same true if you were doing,
Excuse me?
it is the same true in terms of from season to season if you were doing your own with peat moss?
There's no reason why you can't store peat moss. And by the way, if you're doing something like a raised bed, the recipe for your soil for raised bed is 1/3 peat, 1/3 vermiculite, and 1/3 compost. You don't want to put garden soil in a raised bed either. And if you're going to do that, that's probably good.
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah, we'll top it up.
Okay, the roof will take up some space too.
When you do that for a raised bed, you don't buy the peat and the vermiculite from the garden section because it's a whole lot more expensive. Buy it from the construction department in big box stores. It's a lot cheaper that way.
That's pretty good.
Okay, so we're not going to fill this up. I'm filling it only about to here to start with. Okay? Now, typically when you plant a container, you want to position your plants in the pots first. And I can either put that spike in the center or I can put it back toward the back. I'm going to put mine in the center. These are a spreading clumping petunia. And I have 3 of them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to position these first. I'm going to put these toward the back, like so. And then this is alyssum, and it will trail. And I'm going to have these trail across the front, like so. And these are little packs, so I can spread the 3 around. So that's how I'm going to do it. Then I take it out, and I'd actually plant it. Okay? Mary Ann is going to, now, that one's going to look kind of puny because it's not even May yet. That pepper looks kind of tiny, but she's going to put her pepper toward the back. A tomato, this pot is too small for a tomato, but she's going to plant pepper, what do you have here?
Basil.
Basil, and she's got thyme. So she's going to triangulate those, so you have, what can you make out of basil, thyme, and pepper, and maybe you'll have a tomato in another pot. What can you make? Tomato sauce, salsa, spaghetti sauce, just a salad maybe. Okay, so we're each going to go ahead and plant ours. When you take plants out of a container, they're babies. We do not grab babies by the head. Okay? Don't grab babies by the head. We squeeze them along the bottom and loosen them up, and then we gently tip them into our hands. Okay? Now, these plants are still pretty young. If you got them in a month, they might be root bound here. These are not bad, but typically you would loosen the roots up some, and we're not going to have to do that because these plants aren't old enough yet. And then you would make a well, and you would set that in there. Now, we left enough, we didn't fill this up, so we're going to be able to fill soil around this. We can just set them in here. If you filled yours up too much, then you're going to have to make a bigger well. So I'm squeezing at the bottom. Don't grab babies by the head. These roots look, they're not, I'll tease them apart just a little bit. Tuck this in here.
Would you break these apart or leave it in a clump?
I would, you've got, yeah, I would break it apart.
Okay.
I would gently tease it apart. We don't break things. Tease, we tease it apart. We try not to break things anyway.
There.
There you go.
What's wrong if I planted something and it never rooted its hole? It just was there when I take it out in the fall.
Oh, the roots didn't spread?
Right.
You probably should have teased apart the roots a little bit when you planted it.
That I usually do.
Especially if they're coiled around.
Yeah, that I usually do, but sometimes the roots don't grow.
I'm not sure.
Okay, does that require more fertilizer or anything?
No, I'm not entirely sure, sir.
Okay.
Because if you tease them apart, they should have spread. All right, now I've got these in here. I'm going to, before I put that alyssum in, I'm going to add some more soil now. I'm going to add some more soil around these petunias. Get those tucked in there pretty good. I'm tucking the soil in around the plants now, because I didn't fill it up very high when I started.
You need to get all the dirt off the leaves.
Pardon me?
You need to get the dirt off the leaves when you do this.
Yeah, I'm not being very careful, am I?
No, I didn't know if that was, I always try to do that, I didn't know if that was really necessary.
Yeah.
Why is that? Why do you want to make sure the dirt's not on the leaves?
Well, the soil will promote bacteria and fungus on the leaves. So typically when you water your container plants, you don't want to water on top of the plants. You want to water beside the plants, except for the first watering. Then you want to water on top of the plants and get all the soil off the top. Mainly because I'm kind of sloppy when I do this. There are some people who are very particular and very good and they don't get anything on there, and I'm not. I'm not one of those people.
As you're planting that, are you following that 6-inch rule?
Well, I knew none of you were gonna follow it, so I didn't either. This is a 12-inch pot. You would have only had 2 plants in this pot. And if I'd have sent you home with 2 plants in this pot, you would have never believed anything I ever said again.
So there's the theory and then there's the Wisconsin rule.
Yeah, there's theory in the Wisconsin rule, you're right.
Because those are baby plants right now, are you gonna end up having to take some of that ficus plant out of there because there's gonna be too much when they get bigger, or?
Well, yes, and if you would have planted it at the end of May, you still would have ended up taking plants out of here. Because it's just, people in Wisconsin jam plants in here because we have such a short growing season.
If you were wanting to grow blueberries in a pot, would you be putting acidification stuff in with it at this time, or?
Yes, you would have to. We generally tell people you can't grow blueberries in Dodge County because of the lime that we have in our soil. The only way to do it is in a pot. But you really have to be on top of adding amendments to the soil. There are some people who have a microclimate that can grow it, but for the most part, and every time I say that, there's somebody in the audience that has a microclimate who tells me that they grow them quite successfully, and it is true that there are some people who do have microclimates, but for the most part, you cannot grow blueberries in Dodge County unless they're in a container. But they are not easy to grow. They take a lot of futzing, to be technical.
So now that I have my blueberry plants, and they're doing well.
Okay?
We'll see what this year brings. So it's okay.
When did you put them in?
It's been a couple of years. so. I've
Have they had any fruit? Oh, good, you have a microclimate. See,
So-
I told you there's gonna be somebody in the
Well,
audience.
you know, you gotta put the set apart stuff on all the time.
Yeah,
So is it, I'm thinking this year of netting them,
okay.
cause I have birds who like eat them before I can eat them, and that's not fair. So that's okay, just to throw nets on them? Okay, and that won't deter anything?
Nope, that would be fine. You probably want to put a little more soil in here, because see, that's when they water it, it's gonna really sink.
Carol, could you repeat what you have in those two different planters, the plants?
This is alyssum and a clumpic petunia, and then the spike. And Mary Ann has basil and a pepper.
Pepper and.
Thyme.
Thyme, yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're gonna wanna quite a bit more in there.
Okay.
Now, normally we would water this, but since you're gonna take it home, two of you are gonna take these home, I didn't bring anything to water them, and you'll water it as soon as you get it home. You firm the soil down so that you don't have any air pockets. How you doing? You get some back in here? That basil is very pungent.
Yeah, it smells good. Even the potting
Soil.
soil, it smells good.
If I wanna get my hydrangeas turned blue,
I noticed you're
What do we
using
do?
pots that.
What do
Yeah,
I need?
add acid.
when? All the time?
I'd have to look it up. I don't know the answer to that right off the top of my head.
Okay.
But there are some good publications out there about growing.
I've done it in the spring.
Okay.
We have a question over here.
Yes,
On that pot, there's no drainage on the bottom, but there's a drainage like, what do you call that pot?
this pot here?
Yeah,
There's holes in
There
the
are
bottom.
holes in the bottom, and then there's a tray clipped onto the bottom.
but the bottom, the tray doesn't have holes, correct?
The tray does not have holes, that's correct.
How do you know if there's water standing in that tray?
Tip it.
Yeah, it'll
Tip
run
it.
out.
Or, the water will come out if there's water in it.
Yeah, try carrying it, then you might get wet.
All right, Mary Ann, what are our numbers from? What, 1 to?
Oh, I think it's 35,
35?
36 or more.
If you were planting that baby plants and there were lots of roots, but that they had girdled, how severely would you prune the roots?
I would cut them back by 1/3. Okay, are we
Or
ready?
take them off to the ground, which is what she also likes to do.
I do tend to cut things off, yes. Okay, are we ready?
Yeah,
All right, I have not seen the numbers, I deliberately stayed away from that.
it's 1 to 37.
All right, so the flower pot will go to number 12.
Laverne Schultz. Thank you.
And we'll stick with the 2 theme, the vegetables will go to 22.
Marilyn Reichel.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome. Ladies, come up there quick, I'm gonna take your picture.
Oh,
This Carol, I'll take it here. Does anyone else have any questions? Yes, ma'am.
When you have tomatoes and they're growing like crazy at the top and
Oh,
the
down.
fruit isn't getting ripe, are you supposed to keep taking those leaves off?
Well, you can sucker tomatoes if it's an indeterminate variety. Any place there's a crotch, you'll get babies growing up, you can sucker those. You can also prune them back. You can, at a node, you can cut the branch off. You can prune them back that way as well. If you have a lot of, did you fertilize them?
Yeah.
Okay, you need to make sure that you're not fertilizing them with a fertilizer that has a lot of nitrogen in it. There are 3 numbers on the fertilizer bag, NPK. And you don't want to use something with a large number. The first number is nitrogen. You don't want to fertilize them with a large number, that first number. Because that gives you a lot of green growth.
What I've recommended too for gardeners is that if it's getting close to frost time and you want those tomatoes to get ripe, start taking all the branches off that don't have fruit on, so that the sun can get in there and get them ripe. Especially, you know, beginning of October or something, there's probably not much time left.
Okay? Any more questions? Thank you very much for coming.